The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
Kellen Moore's non-committal approach to Derek Carr is leaving more question marks.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast.
New Orleans Saints' new head coach Kellen Moore was introduced in his introductory press conference as the team's new head coach, and in doing so, was given a couple of opportunities to commit to Derek Carr, explicitly asked on a couple of different occasions about whether or not Derek Carr will be the Week 1 starter in New Orleans. And Kellen Moore did not give a fully committed answer when it came to that very situation.
Derek's a tremendous quarterback in this league. I've had so much respect for him, the journey that he's been on. He's a starter in this league. He's a premier player in this league. He's had a great journey, obviously going from Fresno State to the Raiders and now here. Really excited to team up with him and go through this process. And so just like any player on this roster, I just got here a few days ago, and I'm excited to go through this journey with all of them.
Moore was given the opportunity to answer that question again by Mike Triplett from over at NewOrleans.football. And again, you heard a lack of commitment from Kellen Moore around the quarterback, explicitly not stating that he will be the starter going into 2025, and that instead, he's excited to go through the process with Derek Carr, at which time I followed up with another question about what exactly the process was, for what he effectively described was meeting the players and building out the roster. Now, let me be clear. A lack of commitment doesn't necessarily mean a bad outlook for Derek Carr or any type of guarantee that Derek Carr will not be the starting quarterback in 2025. I think all that it says is one of two things. First of which being, he doesn't know yet, and then he'll figure it out as he goes through that process. And number two, being that he hasn't discussed yet his plans with Derek Carr to be the starter or to not be the starter in 2025 with Derek Carr himself, and so therefore is not going to come out and make news on Derek Carr's name without speaking to the player himself first. I think it's one of those two things, which again doesn't necessarily mean a lack of commitment is necessarily a bad thing for Derek Carr. There's just maybe not a reason yet in Kellen Moore's mind to come out and give that away without having had that conversation with Carr. But it is interesting pairing that and comparing that to what Kellen Moore's comments were about Alvin Kamara, the New Orleans Saints star running back.
It's respect for Alvin as a player, obviously one of the premier players in our league. His ability to play in the pass game and the run game, all the different versatile roles that he can play. A lot of people for a long time have been looking, how can we find an Alvin on our football team? And so that's been a really important piece. It'll continue to be a really important piece, and we're really fortunate to have.
Certainly the thing that stands out to you there is the idea that he not only has he been a huge part of what they do, but will continue to be a big part of what they do. That word continue, right? The idea that he is going to be a part of what it is that the Saints are doing in the future. Now, obviously, those two players' contracts are in very different places, so Alvin Kamara is kind of a little bit more locked down in terms of his standing and his position with this New Orleans Saints team. But remember, Alvin Kamara is also the guy that came out and publicly endorsed Darren Rizzi as the team's head coach. So Kellen Moore didn't have to commit himself to anything, but I think he was wise to do so. But comparing and contrasting those two comments on those two quarterbacks, and even looking at Kellen Moore's other opportunities to give a similar commitment to Derek Carr and on Derek Carr's name, he did not do that. So this is really interesting, because it effectively sets up Kellen Moore to be able to make the decision that he wants, which is exactly what the Saints should be supporting from the very beginning. This is now Kellen Moore's team. Kellen Moore is an offensive-minded head coach. He's got a very clear vision on what this team should look like, and therefore should be able to select, handpicked, the person that's going to lead that vision on the field, particularly when it comes to his offense at quarterback. And so, Kellen Moore, Derek Carr, and all of the other players on the roster will undergo their process of meeting, discussing, identifying, and building a roster together. If Kellen Moore decides that he wants to continue to work with Derek Carr going into 2025. It opens up Derek Carr's contract as a mechanism for getting under the salary cap before the new league year begins on March 12th. That could be nice. That could be convenient. It also sets up the New Orleans Saints to continue to do what they've always done, which is try their best to compete, because they'll have their starting quarterback back from the previous 2 years, a little bit more confidence with all that, a little bit less unknown without that, all those other things. Now, whether or not Derek Carr can make good on that opportunity is for everyone else to argue, but for the New Orleans Saints, it's for them to believe that he can. So that would be the option there. If they decide not to roll ahead with Derek Carr, they have a couple of options. They could designate him as a post-June 1 cut, but they won't save that money. That won't help them get under the salary cap or get through salary cap compliance in time for that March 12th deadline, because the $30 million that they'll save, they won't save until June 2nd. They could also try to trade him away, but again, Derek Carr has a no-trade clause, so they would have to make sure they're sending him to a situation that would be good for him and that he would be willing to go to. That would allow most of his money then to travel with him. When it comes to what the Saints would then do behind Derek Carr, if they do decide to move on from him, Spencer Rattler on the roster is an option. We saw Matt Miller from over at ESPN, one of the better draft analysts in the game, talk about how the New Orleans Saints front office loves Spencer Rattler. So if Kellen Moore also loves Spencer Rattler, then you could definitely see them move ahead there. There's been some crazy rumors going on over in Pittsburgh. Does a guy like Justin Fields actually hit the market? And does the comparable nature of a Justin Fields in terms of size, play style, speed, all these other things to a Jalen Hurts end up tempting Kellen Moore to say, let's give that guy a one-year opportunity? Or is there a player in the draft, such as an Ole Miss Jackson Dart, such as a Syracuse Kyle McCord, such as any other quarterback that could potentially be in this year's draft, that appeals to Kellen Moore instead, along with the scouts that would be scouting that quarterback and the offense that Kellen Moore would be looking to put in place? There would be plenty options of trying to figure out how to move ahead. It does make things a little bit tougher in terms of moving the money around. But again, as we've broken down here on the show before, it's not impossible. And in fact, the Saints could still clear enough cap if they get certain things to happen in terms of pay cuts in addition to the restructures to be able to actually spend money in free agency as well. So an interesting situation, not necessarily a denial of commitment from Kellen Moore, but certainly the absence of commitment for right now in terms of what the Saints quarterback situation looks like. Certainly that will become clearer in the coming days and coming weeks.
When the game tips off, the NBA action is getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps me engaged every moment, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. How about some college basketball action, like a monster Saturday night matchup, 1 versus 2? The Iron Bowl, except basketball. It's Alabama. It's Auburn. Auburn, actually a slight underdog despite being the higher ranked team in the AP poll. FanDuel has Alabama favored by 1.5 right now. In FanDuel, customers, new ones anyway, can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com for your shot at 150 smackaroonies in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
The Jets make it official. Aaron Rodgers will not return to the team in 2025.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast.
Well, the Jets made it official yesterday. They put out a statement and said that Aaron Rodgers is not returning to the team in 2025. Of course, this was originally reported on Super Bowl Sunday by Jay Glazer, but the Jets have officially acknowledged it. There are so many angles to discuss when we talk about this decision. And I'll start off by saying, I think this was a move the Jets had to make. I think this was the right direction for the team. I think that this was the best decision for all parties involved, and that includes Rodgers. And from the Jets standpoint, I think there are just a lot of different angles for this. And I think like if you don't like one reason for the decision, there are a number of others, because I think all signs pointed to the Jets moving on from Rodgers being the right move from them. I mean, we can start by talking about the most tangible aspects of this. First of all, is that Rodgers is just nowhere near the quarterback he was in Green Bay. He's better than Zach Wilson. He's better than a lot of other Jets quarterbacks, but the bar cannot be that low. With the Jets, we can't just say better than Zach Wilson or better than rookie Sam Darnold is good enough. We need to have higher standards. And Aaron Rodgers last year came nowhere near playing at the level that he did in Green Bay, where he established himself as a living legend. We saw a player who was nowhere close to the 4-time MVP, and he was set to come back at a salary cap number of $37.5 million. I think it's tough to bring back a 41-year-old who's that expensive in a situation where you have no realistic path to the Super Bowl. Jets really needed to turn the page. And there's also symbolism behind it. The last 2 years, everything's been built around Aaron Rodgers. Everything. The coaching staff has been built around Aaron Rodgers. Nathaniel Hackett was the offensive coordinator because of Aaron Rodgers. In many ways, Robert Saleh kept his job after 2023 because of Aaron Rodgers. I think you could say the same thing about the general manager, Joe Douglas. Players like Alan Lazard and Devontae Adams were brought in because of Aaron Rodgers. And it's all well and good to say, Rodgers can come back and, he just won't have the same authority over the team. We'll just bring back Rodgers, the player. It's much more difficult to execute in practice. And we saw that to a degree this week when the report came out that the Jets had certain asks of Aaron Rodgers. And those asks were symbolic from the standpoint that they were the types of things that suggested that Rodgers was no longer the most important guy on the team. Not doing Pat McAfee's show, making sure he's there at all the mandatory offseason practices. At the end of the day, did Rodgers appearing on Pat McAfee's show win or lose games for the team? Of course not. Did Rodgers skipping the mandatory part of the offseason program last year to go to Egypt really have an impact on the team going 5-12? I doubt it. But Aaron Glenn's trying to come in and establish that he's in charge. And I think that's fair for a first-time head coach. The last 2 years, the Jets have established that Aaron Rodgers was the most important player on the team, that the rules for Rodgers were different than the rules for everybody else. Aaron Glenn wants to come in and change things, and that's Aaron Glenn's prerogative. It's what Aaron Glenn should be doing. It's very difficult to ask Aaron Rodgers to do these things, to take a step back, and it's probably something Aaron Rodgers was not willing to do. I think you talk about the salary cap implications. Now, the Jets are going to be hit with a big dead money figure, but it would be even bigger if you kick the can down the road. If the Jets brought back Aaron Rodgers, they'd be looking at a dead money figure in 2026 of over $60 million. And I think if you look at the way things are lining up, 2025 is kind of setting up to be a reset year for the Jets. And when I say reset year, that doesn't mean the Jets are going to be uncompetitive necessarily. That doesn't mean we're just going to tank this season. I think anybody out there who's saying that this is going to be a season where the Jets tank, where they're the worst team in the league, is not being accurate. And I'll explain why that's true in a bit. But I think things are focused on 2026 really being the big year where this thing takes off, if all goes well. And you don't want to have all this dead money coming off hitting the books in 2026. That's just not really conducive. That's not really conducive to anything the Jets are trying to do. So you can argue that Rodgers is the best, the bridge quarterback options. I actually would debate that. I don't see how, and I've talked about this on yesterday's show. I don't see a lot of difference between the current version of Rodgers. I'm not saying Rodgers' resume as a whole, because Rodgers will be a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the top 15 quarterbacks to ever play, maybe one of the top 10 quarterbacks to ever play. He obviously has a better resume than a lot of guys, but the player he is right now, a very ordinary quarterback, and a guy who's going to be a year older. He's going to be 41, turning 42 in the season this year. There's really not much to suggest he's a special player anymore, and there's even less to suggest that he's going to bounce back at his advanced age and have a big season. I think that this was the first test for Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, and I think they passed it with flying colors. I think first of all, the decision was obvious that the Jets needed to move on from Rodgers, and I know some people will disagree with that, but I think it's tough. I just think there's so much lining up against Rodgers returning, and so little to argue for his returning. But beyond that, I like the way it was handled. This did not turn into the offseason drama many people were expecting, the offseason drama many people were fearing. The Jets took care of this quickly, and they did not come in with preconceived notions. It wasn't Aaron Glenn coming in, breathing fire in his introductory press conference, pounding the table, either saying Rodgers is definitely back or Rodgers is not back. He said, we're going to take some time to evaluate it. Jets took some time to evaluate it. They didn't take forever. They were not in a hurry. They took the amount of time they needed. They spoke with Rodgers. They by all accounts, they went into the meeting with Rodgers with an open mind, and they laid out what I thought were a very reasonable set of asks for Rodgers. And of course, it's Aaron Rodgers' prerogative to say no to that. As I said, as I said earlier in the week, can I get mad at Aaron Rodgers? Should anybody be mad at Aaron Rodgers that he doesn't want to accept the Jets' demands, that he doesn't want to accept canceling the McAfee show interview? No, Aaron Rodgers has a stature in this league where he doesn't owe the Jets those things. The only thing I would say is that if Aaron Rodgers agreed to those things, he should stick to them. But if he doesn't want to agree to them, he's going to be honest about that. That's fair. And I think for all parties, that it's best to move on. And I think the way they, sometimes you get bad news, but you can handle bad news respectfully, or you can handle bad news disrespectfully. If you go back 9, 10 years, the Jets handled the departures of some players pretty disrespectfully. You talk about the way DeBrickashaw Ferguson was let go, the way Nick Mangold was let go, the way David Harris was let go. I think in this case, and Rodgers doesn't have the same stature of the organization as these guys, I think the Jets handled things with Rodgers very respectfully. Maybe he didn't want to hear what they had to say. Maybe he didn't want the conditions that they had. Probably doesn't want to leave. But they've done it at a point where now he has the whole offseason to find a new team if he wants to continue his career, or he has a chance to think about, does he want to retire? The Jets did not string Rodgers along. They laid out, this is what we need. If you're willing to do these things, we could talk. If not, then we'll give you an opportunity to seek another option. And this is the type of professionalism that, quite frankly, I feel like the Jets have lacked for a long time. Now, this doesn't guarantee Glenn and Muji are going to be the most successful duo in franchise history. This is a very small first step, but it is a first step. And I think when you look at the utter chaos that's been existing in this organization for the last couple of years, especially that driven by the owner, it's a positive sign. It's a sign that we have professional people in place now. Now, that doesn't mean that the owner is not still lurking there. Of course, I have concerns about what Woody Johnson's going to do, but for the first time in a while, it feels to me like the Jets are functioning like a professional football operation, and that is an encouraging sign for me.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. Imagine going to the big game this Sunday. That's what a lot of the people around me here on Radio Row are going to do, and the fans who are coming to New Orleans. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have time searching. Inspiration makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and take the work on tickets. Gametime. Download Gametime, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans.
It's time to talk Nick Caley, hired as the Houston Texans offensive coordinator. We finally got an opportunity to talk to him and hear from him. You were actually there live and direct at the press conference. And before we even dive into our initial reactions, this is the clip I got to play for you guys.
First-time coordinator, to answer your second part of the question. Really excited to get an opportunity to evolve this scheme and put, it's not going to be my spin. It's going to be what's best for our players. And it's always going to be what's best for our players. No, we're not pounding a square peg into a round hole. It's going to be based on the strengths of our quarterback, the players, and the guys on this team. So that's what it will always be, designed around.
Big Sarge, what were your initial reactions from today's press conference?
So my initial reactions from today's press conference was I do like Nick Caley's energy. He does bring way more energy than Bobby does. Bobby's a little bit more reserved than Nick is. Nick reminds me of another Nick who speaks like that with a lot of energy, and I don't know if that's just the Patriots way or what, which it would
John
really.
Carroll.
Well, yeah, because it would really be weird because Bill Belichick is a man of few words and low energy. That's another story for another time. John, I really like what Nick Caley had to say. I really like it, but for me, you ever heard Ross nonverbal? D's not words. I think if I'm not mistaken, that's the thing that's over the I think Notre Dame has that, but it's Ross nonverbal. And it means D's not words. Like the words sound great. I just need to see the action. Like what he said and me listening. I'm like, yo, I would totally buy into that as well. But John, I've also had to do, throughout my lifetime, I've been in situations where I've had to do interviews, and there's been people that have sold me in their interview. I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait to hire this person, or I cannot wait to work with this person. And then their words and their actions don't match. That's nothing against Nick Caley. I'm just a little bit more reserved. I need to see it, because even though Bobby was a little bit more conservative, he also, came with that same type of verbiage. He enunciated his words very clearly, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. So I just want to, take a step back and see if he can put that into action, because he's hired as the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans right now. He hasn't gotten a chance to, he's looking at schemes and he's looking at film and things like that. But it's going to be different when you get on the field and you're looking and seeing what you have to work with, and then maybe that will change some things. But don't get me wrong, I love Nick Caley's energy. I love the things that he had to say. I'm just, going to be a little, we'll get to this later, a little apprehensive about another first-time play caller.
Well, I think that's fair. But when I look at my initial reaction to Thursday's press conference, listen, Nick Caley said, I'm passionate, high energy, relationship driven. I'm about invest. I'm going to run when I'm on the field. I move fast. And honestly, Sarge, my initial reaction when I heard that was simply, finally, we should presumably see the offense mirror the defense. And that was an issue for me last year. Too many times I felt like the defense, which we saw time and time again, carried the team, whether it was energy, whether it was scoring points in the second half, whether it was getting off the field to give their offense an opportunity. They were everything for this team. And I felt like the offense time and time again just came up short and was too flat. Now, what I get from Nick Caley is a guy that we could put him next to DeMeco Ryans and the energy level be the same. Like last year it was my special teams coach. What's his name? Frank Ross, DeMeco. They were here and Bobby was over here, right? And now I feel like, based on my initial reaction from the press conference, it feels like it all matched. And that's a good thing, because now we should be able to see the offense be much more aggressive in their play calling, much more aggressive in how they attack defense. And another thing that I really did love, and I want to throw this back to you, was just Nick Caley talking about that word I'm tired of, and that's the scheme, right? It's going to be a Houston scheme. I'm not trying to throw curveballs, but dating back to my time in New England, we were game scheme, and at the end of the day, we want to win. So for me, that really screamed, and this is probably the most important quote, it definitely sounded like a little Bill Belichick. Each week, we should see a different game plan. Last year, especially last year, when we got more information on Bobby and what he liked to do in the system and scheme, tired of that word, that he wanted to run, it seemed like week to week, what you saw, what did you always say? Trust the play.
Trust the play.
Trust the process.
Trust the routes.
Trust the routes. Trust where the read is going. So much so that throughout training camp, Bobby Slug really made CJ's job a whole lot difficult than it should have been. That comes off, when I'm hearing that from Nick Caley, it comes off as each week we're going to have something different to help elevate our offense, to help elevate our offensive linemen, which we'll get into, to help elevate our receivers, to help elevate our quarterback. We're not going to hold you guys back. We're just going to continue to elevate given the opponent we're going to go up against. So I thought that was probably one of the more important quotes and things to hear from him, because it really puts away any doubt of a system that is we have to trust into again. No, the system is going to change. And to that point, again, it's very Bill Belichick-like. Each week it's a different game plan. I think that's a huge positive for Texas fans to hear.
And John, I'm going to tell you like this. I think that once we get into OTAs, and we're able to ask him some X's and O's type questions, especially with, by that time the playbook has been installed in there. I mean, not fully installed, but for the most part, at least 75% of the playbook should be installed, and the next 25% should be OTAs. That next 25% should be training camp, and by the end of training camp and in preseason, they should training camp and preseason, excuse me, they should have that playbook down and ready to go. John, you played something in that clip, and I'm going to read you what he said, and I'm going to tell you what stood out to me. He says, always going to be what's best for our players. We're not pounding a square peg into a round hole. We're not pounding a square peg into a round hole.
We're on the same page. No, listen, I'm excited because that was literally my next thing I wanted to bring up. Excuse me. Yeah. We're not pounding a square peg. What was it?
We're not pounding a square peg into a round hole.
So to me, that screams we're not going to force what's not working. So we're not going to force a second long run. We're not going to force a screenplay that's not there. We're not going to force things offensively. And why everybody should be excited is because mentally, think about just how to make things work easier. My dad used to always tell me, and my brother before he left, work smarter, don't work harder. That's what that quote screams to me, Sarge.
Yep, and John, what it screams to me is this. I'm going to read this one more time. It's always going to be what's best for our players. We're not pounding a square peg into a round hole. You know who that sounds like? Ben Johnson does not pound a square peg into a round hole. Sean McVay does not pound a square peg into a round hole. Kevin O'Connell does not do that. Mike LaFleur. What's the head coach's name in Cincinnati? I can't think of his name.
Not Callahan. He's in Tennessee. Zach Taylor.
Yes, does not pound a square peg into a round hole. And John, this brings me back to something that you and I have talked about on this show religiously, something that I have told you, the reason why I did not want another disciple. I did not want another branch off that Shanahan tree. The reason why is a lot of that Shanahan system also has a lot of Gary Kubiak in it, right? Got some Gary Kubiak in it. You know, Gary Kubiak didn't let his quarterbacks audible. Hey, man, you know what you got to do, John? What we talked about early? Trust the play. Kyle Shanahan runs a trust the play. What's the new offensive coordinator? I mean, what's the offensive coordinator that used to be with the New Orleans Saints? And I think he just went out to where?
Clint
Kubiak, right? Clint Kubiak. Just, those are the guys who were pounding a square peg into a round hole. So me hearing Nick Caley say that lets me know that he's been listening to a Sean McVay and saying, hey, look, if this isn't working, you're going to have to do what, John? Make adjustments. The thing that Bobby Slowick did not do on a consistent basis. Because you know what you do? You put a square peg into a square hole, and you put a round peg into a round hole. And if they're mixed up, sometimes you got to know, let me just move them. Let me just adjust to what this defense is doing. Let me adjust to what this defensive coordinator has done. And he switched up because he's watched film or he's picked up on a tendency that we had. Okay, let's go ahead and switch this whole thing up. So I like the fact that Nick Caley is not going to pound a square peg into a round hole.